Thanks, folks. Pleasure to be here. Let me start off by saying, since this is a new interpreter, whatever interpreter you have on the memory stick is out of date.
I tried.
I know, but I hadn't released the one I was using yet. Naturally, found a few bugs and had to change. The first Nars nested array research system started when I was working for SDSC in the late 70s and early 80s. And I was asked by Philip Abrams, I was living in California at the time, and Philip asked me to come back east to head up the nested arrays effort. So I started working on that about that time frame, and we were looking around for a systems developer to be able to program what I was designing. And at one point I started to look at doing system development in the VSAPL system that SDSC was running at the time. And I added a feature to QuantFMT. If you're familiar with the O qualifier, you have me to blame for that. And I put that in. It wasn't too hard. And one thing led to another, and eventually I was the one who implemented the rest of the system. And that was all done in IBM assembler, IBM 370 assembler. So this product that I'm talking about is coded in C, and so it's just a light year difference in productivity between the two. Although I started with an existing interpreter back then, and it took about the same amount of time to put in nested arrays and all the other features. I couldn't resist putting in lots of other features. It took about the same amount of time to do that as it did to write an interpreter from scratch. So there's just a vast productivity difference. I had no access to any of that original code from IBM or anybody else. So in late September of 2006, I started with a blank screen. And then in 2.5 years later, in February of this year, released it to the public. I hope some of you have had a chance to try it out. I know when I talked with Ray earlier, he said that he was a user of the original Nars system. Anybody else want to date themselves as saying that they used that originally? There's 3 or 4 of us now. Congratulations. Now there's John. Yeah, that was a long time ago. So 25 years later, I figured it was time to start again. I had some time and wanted to contribute to the APL community. I think people have been talking about having a free open source APL interpreter around for quite some time. So here it is. Now this is by no means going to supplant Dyalog or Micro APL or APL2 or the APL 2000 or any of those derivatives. For one thing, they've had a 25-year head start on me, and so it'll take a long time to be able to come up with that. I think this is an interpreter more towards people who are just beginning to learn the language, and as they learn it, they can move on to the commercial developments when they have so much more power. You look at what Morton just showed you, and that's light years ahead of what I'm going to be able to show you. Focus more on language development, implementation issues, things like that. So it's an interpreter designed to be able to add features fairly readily. Language ideas consist of new primitives, functions, operators, new data types, things of that nature. And implementation ideas are faster, smaller, better expressibility, things like that. And this new iteration of Nars runs on any Windows platform natively, but thanks to the magic of a translation layer, not an emulation, but a translation layer provided by Wine, which is another free open source project. You can run Nars on virtually any Linux system, and I haven't had the chance to try it myself, but I think you should be able to run it on a Mac OS system, or at least the Wine people are improving things to the point where that translation layer is going to work in that environment as well. So let's take a look at what we have. And that's not all the difference there. It's first of all, a 64-bit system. So rather than do 32-bit integers on a 32-bit system, I did 64-bit integers on a 32-bit system. So if we look at the data representation, that may not be very meaningful to you, so let's try this. So this is a number, 64 bits. This is a 32-bit interpreter. I haven't gotten the 64-bit interpreter working as yet. The problem there is more finding the tools than anything else. The problem is not so much in this code, because in moving from a 32-bit environment to a 64-bit environment, there's all sorts of issues about widening from this is 32 bits, so it should be 64, and then dealing with all the issues associated with that. I didn't have that because I started with 64 bits to begin with. So array rank and array dimension and integers are all 64-bit integers. The problems that I've had, by the way, in moving to a 64-bit system have been with the libraries that I'm relying upon. So I'm using the GNU Scientific Library, and getting that into a 64-bit environment has been much more of a challenge than I had wanted to. Microsoft made another naming convention change, so they eliminated the underscores in the beginning of C functions as they appear, and that proved to be a problem with various libraries. It's one of those things where you end up spending so much more time working on these little details than making much in the way of progress. You find yourself moving ahead an inch at a time, and that inch is supposed to encourage you to work on the next inch. I saw a lovely email signature the other day that spoke to me about this particular problem. It goes, never let the task you're trying to accomplish distract you from the study of computers. I think we've all run into that, where we've spent far more time studying the computer than making much in the way of progress. So it's a 64-bit system to begin with. It'll be a 64-bit otherwise. It's got the usual set of syntax coloring, a bunch of categories. There are various ways you can control what happens when you reset a system variable, and by that I mean when you take a system variable, fight the keyboard here, I'm sorry, I'm used to a different set, and let's see if I can get them all right. So I can set PP up to a large value, and you no longer need to worry about getting all these little domain errors and then thinking, well, I'll try the next value down, and maybe you'll binary search when you try to figure out what the range is for any of the variables. It'll set it to the range limit. And then if you set it to an empty vector, it then goes back to the system default. So you get to choose various things about that. It has ideas borrowed from other implementations, certainly, from J, from APL2, from Dyalog. And not all of the ones that I borrowed are ones that folks from, say, J would suggest borrowing, but we'll leave it up to them to figure it out. I talked with Roger about this earlier. Excuse me. One of the ideas I borrowed was what I call point notation. So it's a notation like exponential notation, except it uses the letter B, and then you can put digits and letters after that so as to represent this. And this, of course, is an X representation. And this is a constant, not a function computing on its equivalent 10 base value of 15 replicated 4 times. It's not a function, it's actually a constant. This is one that I borrowed from Jay that Roger would perhaps like to disown. I'll let you ask him about that. There's also other point notations, Euler point notation and pi point notation that I think are less useful. This one, as a system programmer, I see using something like this more often. But if you work with different bases, this is a great way to express them. It brings back into custom negative numbers. negative numbers not so much as data but as indices. So we use small positive numbers for indexing into the beginning of a vector, and correspondingly we can use small negative numbers for indexing into the end of a vector. So if we have some vector here as sorry, still working on the keyboard. There we go. That one gets away from me. I have a very small shift key around here. And so if we want to pick up the last element of that, then well, that'll actually pick up that one. I'm going to adopt another convention that Roger and I are still hashing over as to whether we should have a fixed index origin. So let's take a poll. How many people think we should do away with one of the index origins? Not so much which one, but should we do away with one of them? Lots of people think we should do away with one of them, okay? Which one should we keep? Okay, 0? 1? See, enough people like index origin 1.
Stan Kelly suggested 0.5 as a compromise.
Excellent idea. Excellent idea. Well, the choice is, I think, more one of the difference between system programmers and application programmers. If we were to ask this group to, how many people are here, and now let's count off. If we start over here, Roger's going to start with 0. But I think everybody else, if they were to start to count off first, would say 1. And that's what we're talking about, ordinal numbers. And that's the index origin, is really telling us what's the beginning, what's the first ordinal number. And if we're going to start off counting by 1, I'm the first, second, third, fourth. You don't say I'm the 0th.
Yeah, but that's the offset. That's not function. 0 is the offset mode. 1 is the index mode.
That's historical.
Hysterical.
Historical.
No, but that's true. Before the first number, there's none. There's 0 numbers in the front.
So that's cardinality.
Right. I'm just saying.
The number of the preceding is a cardinality issue then.
That's right. Before the
How
first
many?
one. Before the first one, there's none.
Yeah, again, that's cardinality. That's how many are preceding. And the index origin is an ordinal issue. So if we say we're starting off, I'm the 0th person, to the first person, etc. Well, I'm sticking with both of them myself. Nonetheless, there's a way here where you can specify as a preference what you want to have your clearless values. Yeah, well, it looks a lot better with a smaller font. So index origin here, you can change that to 0, and then save this, and that'll be saved. And whenever you do a clear, you'll then be able to have that as the index origin. So let's try that. No. Where are you? I do apologize for my poor typing. By the way, we just did a clear, and you'll notice that in opposite to other implementations, we didn't lose our old workspace. And so here are the initial clear workspace we had, and I loaded a workspace, and that's over here. And we did another clear workspace, and that's over here. And so one of the nice features here is you have multiple workspaces open to you at any one time, and then be able to load things from disk and save them back to disk and such. So we've got, let's do this again, now that we've changed origin. And now let's pick up the last element. So it'll be clear to you with negative numbers, meaning that we are indexing from the back of the...
So when you pick the word 0, how do you pick the last element?
How did I pick it out?
Minus one, minus zero?
In origin 1.
You know, within zero.
In origin 0, the last one is from B negative 1. And in origin 1, the last element would be
0?
0. Exactly.
Minus 0.
So just like we're... Is that clear? Okay. There are also negative numbers generated by the index generator. They're used in the axis operator. They're used in pick and squad and left argument transpose. So any place where we're previously restricted to for not positive or non-negative numbers, depending on your origin, you then can use negative numbers. So it extends it by one range. So you've got say roughly 0 to n on one side and roughly negative n to negative 1 on the other side. Both of those ranges are then available as indices. You can mix them up in between if you like. Just depends on how you like to think about using those origins.
You could have said what I have minus 4. Then I would...
What do you think about that, Roger? Thank you.
Negative ratio.
There's another good idea I'll write down. Yeah, we can change it to the left argument of reshape. Let's see how that works.
I'm going to leave now. You got one off yourselves.
I have unified indexing, and this is a means of, you're familiar with what's called reach indexing or pick, and scatter indexing or rectangular indexing. They can be used within the same array. That is, you're indexing an array. You can pick out an element at the top. I can also pick out something down at the bottom. So here we have this so I make a monadic FMT, put out a boxed array. Notice this is a little different than the boxed arrays you've seen before, where it puts the actual dimension. Those are typically small numbers, so let's put them into the top rather than an arrow pointing one direction or the absence of an arrow if it's a scalar. And then the depth is put down here. So you can see pretty much at a glance, without losing, I think, anything in the way of clarity, that you've got depth and indices, and this works. What am I doing wrong here? So here's a prototype array, multi-dimensional. It's a prototype, so that's an empty array, so it only has one element in it as such that we're interested in, which is the prototype. So that's displayed there once. And you get pretty much all the information you need about that array just from that. Now, so that's, we'll go back to the array V. So if I want to be able to extract a value from that, so there's one value. Oops. Really wanted this one right. And then from that I can pick up and reach down. Zilda reaches down through the scalar and picks up the index at 1 out of that. This works fine for higher dimensional arrays as well. So here we have this, and we can then pick out we'll pick out the 1-2 element, because we're not using any semicolons here. And then if we want to pick out the, let's see, I'm going to need another, notice we also get a visual indication of mismatched parentheses here.
Which article are you?
Good question. Good question. Tell you what. So this picks up the well, Morton had his system errors, and I've got my puzzle as to why this only prints out one element.
Because the second one is 0, is that empty?
These are numbers, so. See, that's not right.
What MMT then? Is that sure?
That only just confused me more. Should show a 0. Okay, excellent. Here's a bug for me to track down while I'm here. All right, well that should. I remember when we were giving demonstrations over time sharing, you'd lug this time sharing terminal all along and connect up through a modem that the fast ones are doing 300 baud and lose connection at some point. And we got to the point where we would then make sure there was a chalkboard in the room too. And then immediately say, well, when the system comes back, it would show this. And then you could be the system and write it on the chalkboard. Let's see, the negative indexing the access operator also is extended to let's see, well, simple one here. You're used to being able to do something like this, and correspondingly in that area you can use negative indices. And I'll show you an example of that. If we were to, this is one that I used in the boxed array display. So here we have a multi-dimensional array, and we'll convert that to characters. Looks the same. And now if we wanted to convert a multi-dimensional array that is more than 2 dimensions down to a 2-dimensional array, characters now, and preserve the interdimensional spacing. Sounds very Star Trek-ish. Preserve that interdimensional spacing. Then you would use, well, you wouldn't use something like that, but use that. Why am I going to the next line? I don't understand that. Oh. Is there a way of, I have a knife. Can I turn that off so that... Roger and I share many things, and one of our...
And some machines, but now you're going into the study of computers.
You got it. That's exactly what's happening. So this is a little idiom that concatenates a blank to the -2 coordinate on the bottom of that z, and then does a rabble, which coalesces two coordinates, coalescing the -3 and -2 coordinates. Now, for a high-dimensional array, it's inconvenient to be able to specify what would be the -2 and the -3 coordinates. You have to add rho z in there at some point and then get the offsets of that correct. But here, it looks very nice. And that's the same array we had before. Pardon me, but now it's a matrix. So this is a means of reducing a multidimensional array down to a matrix. Pardon me. Also illustrates using control structures on one line, and of course using control structures on one line in immediate execution mode. So rather than have to open up a function, type in a one-liner, save it, run the function, then you can do it just as easily directly from that. User-defined functions also have their own set of interesting properties. Let me show you a full-blown header. So this uses an idea I got from Dyalog, where you can have name list. That is, here's a right argument that has to be 4 elements. So when you call this particular function, it's actually a derived function of an operator, then you have to supply a 4-element vector or something conformable with a 4-element vector. And the system automatically splits that apart into the variables R1 through R4. And then here's the right operand. I said it was a dyadic operator. Here's the left operand. This is the name. You can have an axis operator as well on user-defined functions and operators. And this is just another value that's passed into the function for you to use. After all, if you want to eliminate that difference between primitive functions and user functions, then we need to provide the same kind of capabilities between the two. And over here is a optional left argument that, if it's present, has to be a 3-element vector or something conformable to that. And then finally, the result is achieved by specifying both Z1 and Z2 within the body of the function. And then that the system automatically joins together into a 2-element vector and passes it back as a result. And the braces around here indicates that this is non-displayable. I think Dyalog uses the lovely word shock. So here's a question for you. The braces here indicate that this is an optional argument. Now, I know some implementations don't make a difference. They don't indicate any difference there. And I guess my question for you is, should there be some special marker in the header of a ambivalent function to indicate that it's ambivalent? Anybody have any thoughts on it? Any poll for that? How many people use an implementation where there's no marker in the header? How many people use an implementation like that? So there's a bunch of implementations out there. Do you have a preference for whether you use a marker or not?
Is this ignoring compatibility?
I'm sorry, ignoring what?
Ignoring questions of upwards compatibility.
Correct, yes.
Okay, yes.
You think there should be a marker in the header?
What are you going to do?
No. Anybody work out how to specify the ambivalent rational? That's what I would.
You have to turn around and look at it in the opposite direction. I'm sorry, yeah.
I was just going to ask you, if you have, if your left argument is not ambivalent, if you must have one, how can you tell the grouping of the left argument?
We'd use parentheses around it.
You use parentheses.
Yes.
There's no need here because you've got braces.
We could put both braces and parentheses in there, indicating it's optional and it's a name list, or you could just use braces indicating it's optional and a name list. I allow both of them, and similarly for the result.
Right.
I noticed Dyalog didn't do the result. Split apart that.
It does. Yeah, it does.
You do now?
It does, but not the left argument. That's, yeah, we can do that for you. So
I'm sorry, what?
we collect the results like you do.
Oh, good.
But, we didn't so far we haven't allowed a structured left argument. For not very good reasons. There's no call for it, end quote.
So you're not speaking as an official representative?
Well, I need to answer that, I am not.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
It's not like this is being recorded.
Yeah, we could, yes, so we allow multiple results and multiple right arguments. Currently, as I'm going to press, we don't have multiple left arguments.
Okay, well that's a hop, skip, and a jump.
Yeah, because
And maybe I can shame you into doing
yeah, oh yeah.
it. All right, that's my goal.
Good.
I mean, there is an argument which is that traditional APL functions should take a left and a right argument array. Once you start splitting it up, you sort of into methods. Sort of traditional programming called conventions from other languages. And those should probably be restricted to the right argument. I think that's how the argument is applied. There is one.
Probably should be restricted. Okay. Well, this is actually called an experimental interpreter, so whenever I put something in that people think is strange, I just say it's experimental. Don't use it, it's okay.
Did you consider a way to set a default variable if a part of the argument is not specified?
Some kind of null, you mean?
Whatever it is. Something like parentheses assign the name. So it's not
Oh, I see, a default value.
Default, yeah.
That's an interesting idea, to be able to specify something like that.
If you look at S or S plus, they do that. It's when you specify your arguments and do something equals, which is a default.
Right.
But you'd then be into having to have keywords for the arguments, so you knew which ones you were specifying.
I think what he's talking about is doing something like up here, where we might have another layer of parentheses, and then something like this. Is that the idea, Evan?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I saw something like this back when I was coding the original Nars system in the assemblers they were using. As they had macro capability where you could say, you know, I need these, and if you don't put that one in, then that's okay. Of course, now the question is if you provide if you do two of these up here. Let's see, is there some confusion about that?
In S, they do use the keywords. So you have a name, you're expecting A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm.
C might have a default value, so you say C equals.
I think about it. That's an interesting idea. John?
We think we stole the show results syntax from you 25 years ago. I think you had those results in braces.
Right.
And it always occurred to me that it would be more intuitive if the right brace also enclosed the assignment arrow, because the whole thing there always seems to be strange to me, but we didn't do that either. We have exactly the same as you did. Do you have any observation on that?
I hadn't thought about the role of the assignment symbol there.
It would be more logical if it places erroneous around the assignment. Because what it's really saying is it may or may not return a result.
Well, this is a difference between displayability.
Well, it sort of is a result, isn't it?
Well, this is the difference between displayability of the result versus whether or not it's present. And this kind of syntax, I think if neither Z1 and Z2 is assigned within the body of the function, that it lets the function exit and marks it as having no value. But if you assign one and not the other, then you get a value error inside the function at the point you try to exit from the function. So you're still in the context of the function at that point.
Do you ever feel, maybe this is a good show of hands, that some people think show results are an abomination and should be strangled at birth? Do you ever feel about that? I think there's a case for them.
I think so and thought so 25 years ago.
You do, there is quite a lot of anger about them.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it's related to the question of whether output in a function should be displayed in the session. And obviously, if you type 2 plus 2 in the session, then anyway you want to see 4. But if you have a function which has 2 plus 2 in it, you may not want to see the output.
And so I have to force it in through quad output
Quad output.
to
I
display.
think some, I think APL Plus when they have a flag to disable output when this is explicit.
Okay. Interesting ideas. Yes.
Come back to your earlier question about marking the left argument. I would prefer to have the markers on. I do write and those functions, but there are minority of the functions that I write. So I would prefer it really not to have the added uncertainty of wondering whether or not the left argument is correct.
Yeah, I think of having a marker in the header as being an aspect of writing robust code, so that if you don't have a marker in the header, and you consider yourselves professional APL programmers, and which we all are here, then does that mean that whenever you write a dyadic-only function, you always put in code that tests to see that the left argument is present? I don't think you do that. Now, if you're going to have that code in for an ambivalent function, so it's got to be there for an ambivalent function. After all, that's the intent. Why force people to put it into a dyadic-only function and, in essence, break existing code if this were your first time implementing it? I lost this argument, by the way, when we were doing it at SDSC, and I have not lost that argument with myself, though, on this implementation. So I put that in. All right.
Can I, if you do the thing with R2, give you that default value, how would you tell it's R2 that's missing?
Oh, you would need R3 and R4 also.
Yes.
Okay.
Although this is just development.
Or you could start putting in null values, so maybe.
You're right, we need some decision rules on that. I want to think that through a little more carefully.
Something in this area of dialogue is the monadic quadradic availability. We always test monadic quadradic that I miss in dialogue. As in Nars.
Take a note.
Have you considered using the editing facility to colour aspects of the function line? So if it suspends or unusually falls over, when you bring up the editor, it shows missing ambivalence or missing elements, allowing the editor to colorise.
Well, the editor does colorize.
No, but elements of it.
Of course, as in so let's say if I've run the function and I didn't provide the right number of arguments.
Yeah.
I'm not in the function at that point.
Right.
So I get a length error when in the attempt to call the function. So I'm not actually in the function. So the editor doesn't have a lot of context to deal with there. I mean, I can certainly edit the function at that point. I guess I'd have to analyze that length error and figure that out. That'd be a little tricky. But I like the idea. I think the syntax coloring and that visualization aspect is quite important. It really helps understand things. How are we doing on time?
We're just about out of time.
Just about out of time. Okay. Let's see. What else? Well, there are lots of other things. The website has a wiki that describes as much as I've been able to type in so far, although there's a lot more there. Feel free to add to it. It has a forum for discussing things about the language and such, reporting bugs and various other things. There's a what's new section, so you see what has been added recently, what bugs have been fixed, and what new features there are. Any more questions?
What about localized variables? Wouldn't it be nice to have them automatically localized so that you don't have to, that you should specify which ones are semi-global and global instead?
Yes. Let's see. It doesn't do it automatically, but if we were to type in a variable, then you can right-click on it and then click localize.
Yeah.
It's not doing it automatically.
What I was saying is not localizing it automatically. I was saying that localized variables should be the default. And in order to make them visible, you would have to specify them in the header as being semi-global or global.
Right.
This is an old idea. And,
Yes, it's...
I'm more into actually application programming, and this generates so many bugs. It would be better to specify it as semi-global or global in the header, and other variables should be localized automatically local.
Or alternatively...
Hyper minus as a separator. If you use hyper minus as a separator.
Well, alternatively, there's colorization. So this shows you a variable that's not local.
Oh, yeah.
Then the editor, upon exit, could tell you that you've got some variables that have not been localized. Things of that nature. So that's like PHP has a global keyword that says these variables are global, and everything else is then localized. And that has been a source of great frustration as I write PHP code, figuring out why doesn't this work? Because you don't get a value error on it. You never signed it, but it's happy to just let you go. Lots of other things to talk about. Didn't get terribly far into it. Take a look at the website, the wiki, the forum. Enjoy that. And I'll be here for the rest of the conference if you have any more questions.
Thank you.